Hello, and welcome to Cheers to Fears, where we take horror films and turn them into drinking games. We're your two hosts. I'm Tucker.
And I'm Alex. Today, we'll be making a drinking game for Terror Train, directed by Roger Spottiswoode, and written by T.Y. Drake, Daniel Grodnick, and Judith Rasko.
Here we are in yet another movie in the late 70s or early 80s starring Jamie Lee Curtis, where she plays a soon-to-be college graduate named Alana. During Alana and her friend's freshman year, they pull a seemingly innocent New Year's Eve prank that ends up scarring one of the students and putting him in a psych ward.
Alana, still not forgiving herself after that night, decides to celebrate one more New Year's Eve party with her friends. And what her friends don't know is that a serial killer has joined them on the train, and as the night progresses, things get a little bit messy.
As we carry on to the drinking rules, we will remind you that from this point on, spoilers will be in effect. So that is why we will post the drinking rules now for people who have not yet seen the movie. If you haven't yet seen Terror Train, come back when you're done watching it, and if you have, well, let's continue.
To start off every drinking game, we have death as our first rule, and that came to 10 sips.
Yeah, and there's a good amount of death in this movie, kind of more than I expected, not gonna lie.
Yeah.
Some of them were just implied, but still counted as deaths.
Yeah. I will say this, that for the time period and for the budget, I felt like the deaths were pretty well for the most part.
Yeah.
Even though like some of them were like blatantly dummies. Like, I guess some examples of that is if you see Doc's head, it was blatantly looked nothing like a real head, to say the least.
Yeah.
The other one was such as the death of the final scene in the movie where he falls from a cliff. Didn't look too realistic. I think there was one more. I guess when he gets derailed by the train, the other guy gets derailed by the train. Don't remember his name, but that one wasn't too realistic either. But again, dummies, time period. What else do you expect?
And that was possibly a budget thing. I'm not sure what the budget was for this movie. I mean, it didn't look like it had a huge budget, honestly. So that could be a budget thing, and for the time period, I feel like they did a decent enough job and worked with what they could. Mm-hmm. Anyways, we'll move on to the second rule, which is whenever somebody screams, cries, or yells, which gave us 17 sips. And honestly, with Jamie Lee Curtis in the picture, you can kind of expect there to be a decent amount of screams.
Yeah, especially for an actor like that, you basically gotta play to her strengths, which is screaming. She's a scream queen.
Exactly.
So let's move on to the next rule here. Rule number 3 is whenever you see a dead body or a body part that wasn't a character. You can see a body part that was a character, like a severed head or a severed finger, but if it's like a dead body of a character that's revealed or something like that, we didn't count it, just because it's basically death again.
Yeah, and that gave us 8 sips for this movie. And just kind of to reiterate what you were saying, finding Doc's or Jackson's body doesn't count because we know they died. We counted it for death. Yeah. But the corpse used to prank Kenny does, just because we didn't see that death beforehand. I mean, they kind of, they kind of intermingle with each other and count it for whatever you want, but you don't have to double up for this.
Yeah. And another thing we did, like we decided to include like Doc's head, for example, because it was obviously like severed from the body.
Yeah, exactly. So moving along on to rule number 4, it's whenever you see a magic trick, which happened 14 times.
I feel like it's good to mention now that David Copperfield was in this movie, which is a very interesting choice that I'd say.
Yeah, it was actually the only movie he acted in, and like where he wasn't playing himself, I guess.
Yeah. He was still a magician, though.
He was still a magician, so it was a character based on him, I guess.
However, I will say that some of the magic did feel real and some of it felt fake. So, for example, like you can see him do like a lot of the card tricks, and I do believe those are genuinely real. Yeah. And other tricks like his assistant appearing in like thin air from the crowd, that felt super fake.
Yeah, but actually, I did read that he truly did perform those tricks for like the cast, I guess. So like basically what you saw as an audience member watching him do those tricks, that's actually what the cast was seeing too. So the tricks were all genuine. Yeah. They just, I don't know, I do know what you mean though, how they did kind of feel like they weren't real. And I think a missed opportunity in this movie relating to deaths is they could have had more deaths relating to magic. Yeah. Especially in the end, it would have, gave it a little bit of a unique flair.
Yeah, it would have made the movie a lot more memorable, so I feel like that kind of hurts it. So moving on to rule number 5 is whenever somebody talks about trains, you take a sip. This came to a total of 4 sips.
Yeah, and it happens more so at the start of the movie, I guess, rather than the end. And there's not much else to say with this rule.
Maggie, I wish to hell they'd put a radio on that train. What if one of those kids got drunk and fell off?
So I'll just move on to rule number 6, which is whenever somebody talks about Kenny Hampson. And this rule gave us 5 sips.
Who's that?
Oh, that's just Kenny Hampson. He couldn't handle it.
This rule I feel is like very good to remind first-time watchers that he's relevant in the story, but at the same time, I feel like the twist that Kenny was the killer was too obvious. So in saying that, I really wish the killer was somebody like Mo, for example, because it could have been more impactful in the movie.
Yeah.
I feel like it would have been just a better twist overall. Like he was like friends with Kenny and wanted to get close to Doc and Alana to kill them. I just feel like that would be a better setup rather than like, oh, he escaped a mental asylum.
Yeah, and I don't know, I can get what they were trying to do, and it wasn't a bad choice, I guess, but it was, I don't know, it was set up and it was way too obvious, I think.
Yeah, they did kind of set it up in the way that the assistant was the killer, which is kind of unique. It wasn't like the David Copperfield guy or like just a random person on the train. I feel like I would have liked the idea of it just being a random person on the train more than the assistant. The assistant felt like a little bit forced, but at the same time, that's like an oxymoron, me going against exactly what I just said.
Yeah. And I will admit that was the one thing about the reveal that I did like is how he was dressed as the assistant, and like throughout the whole movie, that's who was playing the assistant. So I do like that part about it.
Yeah, I guess it was kind of nice that it was still like he's still related to magic in a way. How they alluded to that later.
Yeah.
So speaking of which, our next rule is whenever the killer changes costumes, which came to a total of 6 sips. So we mentioned how he's the assistant, so he changes like out of the assistant costume to actually Kenny.
Yeah.
But I feel like the main highlight of the movie is just seeing him switch out from costume to costume, like the Groucho Marx costume to the lizard costume. I feel like that was definitely something that at least gave the movie like a unique kind of flair to it.
Yeah, but it kind of felt like a Halloween movie. Like, why were they all dressed in costumes for a New Year's Eve party?
I don't know.
But yeah, it was a New Year's Eve movie. But
yeah, maybe they wanted to make it a Halloween movie, but then they were like, oh, Jamie Lee Curtis in like another Halloween movie.
Yeah, true.
So it could be that. So I understand why they didn't do it, especially since it was only 2 years apart, right?
Well, and especially that there's already so many Halloween-related movies. Maybe they just wanted something different at the time.
Yeah.
And just chugging along to rule number 8, it's whenever you see an outside shot of the train, that gives us 11 sips throughout the movie.
It kind of shows like the scenery for it. Like there's not a whole lot for it. My favorite shot though is the very end shot with Kenny gets thrown off the train.
Yeah.
That's my favorite outside shot of the train.
Yeah.
And just like our Black Christmas drinking game, we have to have a New Year's rule. So whenever somebody mentions New Year's, you take a sip. Happy New Year! And that came to 3 sips.
Yeah. So it's a New Year's Eve movie that only mentions New Year 3 times?
3 times.
And so, I mean, you could do without this rule if you want, but it's a New Year's Eve drinking game, so we had to include it.
Yeah, exactly.
And another rule that kind of coincides with New Year's Eve is whenever you see alcohol or drinking is mentioned. This gave us 19 sips.
Yes, we should mention, however, that we only did 1 per scene. So, like, if you saw somebody drinking in a scene or saw, like, a beer can in a scene, that's 1 sip for the scene. Because, like, there's so many, like, beer cans we find, and, like, it's so hard to, like, count each individual person in the background. Be like, that person's drinking, that person's drinking, that person might be drinking. So we kept it at that. And even then, it was still 19 sips, right?
Yeah, and pretty much every scene would be mercied if you were to count every individual, can or bottle or person with a cup in their hand drinking, or so just count 1 per scene.
Yeah, and that would probably be more sips than the entire other 9 rules, I think. So
absolutely.
We just didn't include it for that purpose.
Yeah, made it easy to count.
So we finally finished talking about all the rules for this movie, so we should talk about all the totals we got for this movie. Total number of sips for this movie is 97, which is equivalent to drinking 3 standard 12-ounce cans, and that's of course based off our 30 sip per can scale.
Yeah, and the pacing was fine. Like, there wasn't anything crazy, really. Some scenes got a little bit more difficult, I guess, like the David Copperfield doing magic tricks. Those ones kind of stacked up quite frequently at times.
Yeah.
Or the drinking or alcohol being shown was pretty regular. But aside from that, it was, it was pretty tame drinking game.
I would say tame, definitely. And I guess the main thing to talk about, how this is, I think Jamie Lee Curtis is like 5th horror movie that she stars in within like this time and like I guess 1978 to like 1982 even. So like a 4 or 5 year span. She's in a lot of other horror movies. I guess the first 2 Halloween movies, Road Game, Prom Night, and The Fog. So she's in quite a few horror movies within like that tiny chunk of time.
Yeah, it's like a 4 or 5 year time span. She did 5 movies, so like that's just straight up amazing. And I don't know. She must have been burnt out after that or something.
Like, and the other thing to mention is a lot of those were like pretty good selling horror movies. Like obviously there's the first 2 Halloween movies, Prom Night, The Fog. Like she made some quality content back in her prime for sure. Even if you want to call this like her prime, like you could mention like any spot in time being her prime, depending on how you look at it, really.
Yeah, even modern day, really.
Yeah. But yeah, no, these movies for sure cemented her as a scream queen, like as people were consistently using her for horror movies. Now I guess talking about the movie a little bit more, there were some scenes that hurt physically, and like I hate a lot of the movies where it's just like flashing light scenes. So I remember, I think it's one of the first scenes in the movie where it's just a traffic light like just consistently like flickering between like
the 3 colors.
The 3 colors upstairs in the frat house, I think it is, and that just drove me up a wall.
Yeah, that's fair. But one scene that I did like is when Ed dies, because he's like, you know, he's the jokester of the group.
Yeah.
And so people just assume he's joking, or like, you know, he's not. People don't assume that he's dead, and so yeah, I don't know. I just liked how that whole thing was set up.
Yeah, no, it has great payoff. I feel just the whole stabbing thing. I don't know why he rolls onto the fucking track, but whatever. We'll get to that in Darwin Awards, I guess. So he rolls onto the track, but like people are just thinking like, classic Ed, as he's like dying, bleeding out.
Yeah.
Jokester. But anyways, like it got us kind of thinking of where the sword came from, and I think it was like hinted at that one of David Copperfield's magician character, that one of his swords was missing from his sword box.
Oh, I'm sorry. Is something missing?
Yeah.
So I think that was cool.
Yeah, and the fact that it was Kenny who was his assistant.
Yeah.
It kind of explains where that sword went, I guess.
Yeah.
Like, and you realize that afterwards. So it kind of all comes full circle.
Yeah, definitely. So it's just one thing to think about that I liked a little bit. That you can watch it, like it has rewatchability. Like, that's where the sword came from.
Yeah, exactly.
So it was cool that they added that little thing in.
So apart from Ed and maybe even Alana, you could say most characters felt kind of bland. Like there wasn't a lot of character development for them or anything. I didn't really care for any of them, really.
Yeah.
Even David Copperfield's character, like he was just so bland. Like I don't have any other word for it.
Exactly.
He's just like, you know, so stoic. He has no facial emotions or anything.
And you can't really blame him since he's not an actor, but like a lot of the other characters, like obviously you hated Doc because he was caught cheating with his girlfriend and then tried to get like Mo caught at the same time. Like, but like a lot of characters just didn't have like the same like energy to them. Like Mo, I didn't really like too much.
Yeah.
The only guy that I really liked is Carney, the conductor.
Yeah.
That was the only real character I liked. But other than that, I felt like a lot of the characters were just like not great.
Yeah, they didn't try to focus too much on the other characters, or maybe they tried, but it didn't work. I don't know.
Yeah.
It wasn't great for character development. So it kind of has the similar vibe as Friday the 13th because, you know, people are kind of there just to get killed.
Yeah.
You're not seeing the killer's face until the end of the film, and there's just a bunch of drunk and horny teens there to be murdered. And this came out the same year as Friday the 13th. It was one of the movies that came along with the 80s slasher craze. And yeah, it was just another one of those movies where not much character development, but a lot of blood and murder,
a lot of death, blood, murder, no character development. So overall, what are your thoughts on the film?
Overall, I thought the film it's a pretty fun watch, honestly. Like it's one of the probably better 80s slasher movies to come out. Not any masterpiece or anything, you know, it's just a fun watch. Like it does have its flaws, and it's not a perfect movie or anything. The character development isn't there, but for what it's worth, it's a fun watch, and I will say this is my first time watching the movie, so I'll probably go back and rewatch it again at some point.
Yeah. In saying this, however, I think it was both of our first times watching it, actually.
Yeah.
But in saying that, I enjoyed it too. Like, I feel like the plot had a few missed opportunities, such as like there not being magic involved.
Yeah.
I wish there was just kind of more magic-related deaths towards the end, but that's kind of it. But I did honestly enjoy the movie for what it was.
Yeah. So by the sounds of it, we did have the same kind of opinion on this movie, and you know, it was a fun watch for both of us. But for now, we'll just move on to the Darwin Awards, I guess, where we award one not-so-lucky nominee, the Darwin Award. This award goes out to the character who made a stupid decision that resulted in them getting killed, someone else getting killed, or simply resulting in something bad happening that could have easily been avoided. This award can also be given to a character who is just plain dumb. Here are the nominees.
Today's first nominee is Ed for rolling onto the train while he was dying. With his final moments, he decided to hide himself so the body wouldn't be found right away.
Second is Kenny Hampson for wanting a kiss from Alana, which caused him to go into a frenzy and fall off the train. That one is definitely on him.
The final nominee is Doc, and where do we begin with this one? He dragged Alana back into the train where the killer was, shouting every man for themselves, breaking the locks in the room that trapped him with the killer, and not to mention running away from the group.
And the winner is Doc, of course. It feels like he tried his best to get killed at the end of the movie, and unsurprisingly, he succeeded.
And with all that being said, we hope you enjoyed our episode on Terror Train. If you end up playing the game alongside the movie, or if you have any other feedback or suggestions, let us know in the comments below. Also let us know in the comments what you thought of the movie. Also a reminder, today is the last day to vote for Horror Tuber of the Month, so if you want to, now's the last chance to get your vote in. We are releasing Who Won Horror Tuber of December on January 4th.
We also now have an Instagram account, so feel free to follow us over there. Make sure to like and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss the next week's episode, where we are going to be making a drinking game for Slenderman. May God help our souls. If you want to check out our most recent video, click on the box on the top right, or if you want to see a playlist of all the drinking games and movies we review, click on the box below it. Thanks for tuning in, and this is us saying cheers to fears.